Welcome everybody to the Hyperion Solutions Conference. Today, we'll be talking about what's new in 11.2.2, a technical deep dive on Oracle's latest on-prem version. I'm Jeff Henkel. I'll be your host for this conversation. I am a certified Microsoft Azure architect as well as a certified Oracle OCI professional. So hopefully we'll have a good conversation, and let's just dive right in. So to start things off, we do have a webinar giveaway that we are offering today. So if you're interested in a $25 Apple gift card, you can go out to our webpage, address is here, and I'm going to show this slide again at the end. But you can go and subscribe, and if you do that before tomorrow morning, then you will be entered to win the gift card. So please feel free to take part of that. We'd love to hear from you. Let's just talk a little bit about the objectives and overview of what we're going to cover today. So I'm going to do a brief introduction, a little bit more detail about myself and iArch Solutions and what we offer. Then we're going to dive right into why you would be interested in an on-premise upgrade or even staying on-premise. We're going to talk a little bit about 11.1.2.4, the previous newest version, and then the various 11.2 offerings that are now out there. I'm going to talk about what is involved in downloading, installing, and configuring the software, some of the fun with the RCU, some of the fun with OHS, Weblogic and host names considerations, some various migration considerations, and in summary, we'll talk about when you should move. And hopefully, if all goes well, we'll have some time for Q&A. So just to kind of start things off with a who am I? So as I mentioned, I'm Jeff Henkel. I've been in the infrastructure world around the Hyperion EPM stack for over 20 years. I started with Pillar and Enterprise, Citrix way back in the day. And I've pretty much been involved on the infrastructure side all the way through the birth of HFM and planning up to the current iterations. So from an infrastructure perspective, I think I've pretty well seen it all over the years. I'm also a Kscope and collaboration speaker for the Collaborate conference. I've led the infrastructure track for selecting the presentations for Kscope, and I've done dozens of migrations on-prem to cloud, on-prem to on-prem, and I've been involved in hundreds of general EPM implementations and migrations over the years. So. A little bit about iArch Solutions, and we're going to dive into the stuff everyone's here to really hear. You know, we're a full services consultancy focusing not just on EPM, but also on cloud-based solutions and OCI, Azure, and Amazon Web Services. We've got offices across the US and Canada. Our focus is generally on large, complex implementations and integrations across the Fortune 500. We're a 24/7 managed services shop, so we're always here when you need us, and we're a big group of certified architects and engineers out here. But we're not limited just to the infrastructure side. We also offer support and implementation expertise around the applications themselves, data governance, EPM, BI, education, training, you name it. So if you are looking for something, we're here and we're happy to help you out. All right, so let's start with our first poll question. You should get a poll pop up here in front of you. And the question that I'd like to get some feedback on for folks is, what is your interest in EPM 11.2.x? Okay, so some of your options are, I thought this was part of my Prime membership. I'm on a legacy version and looking to upgrade. I installed on 11.2.x, regretted the experience, and now I'm here looking for help, and I just really like webinars. Got about 30 seconds to get your answers in, and then we're going to show the results.
So Jeff, it looks like both poll questions launched at the same time. I apologize for that.
Oh, that's okay. I'll go over them again when we get to the second one.
Yeah.
And I don't see the timer right now, so once 30 seconds has passed, feel free to close it out.
Yep, I think we are right there at 30 seconds. So I'm going to end polling. Looks like for question number 1, though, you have 74% on legacy version and looking to upgrade, with 11% on just really like webinars, 9% on they've installed 11.2.x, regretted the experience, looking for help, and then 7% on I thought this was part of the Prime membership.
Good stuff. Okay, so as I kind of suspected, the bulk of the results that we see really are folks, you know, they're in that 11.123, 11.124 world, and they're wondering, where do I go next? So let's talk a little bit about what that experience actually looks like and why we might want to stay on premise as opposed to moving immediately to the cloud. So one of the big reasons for folks staying in their current environment is concern about legacy entanglement. So you may have systems that are on-prem today that do not integrate well with the cloud. You may have those legacy systems be on older software, older hardware, and not looking to necessarily upgrade those to a newer version. And on-premise gives you some control there into how those integrate into another on-premise environment in EPM. Another big reason of why to stay on-premise is cost. You've got essentially a cost shift when you move to the cloud of moving a capital expense to an operating expense. And so for a lot of folks, that ability to sort of slow play the way you pay for your hardware and your software over a capital expense is easier to sell, if you will, internally versus an operating expense where you're paying by user month over month for a cloud experience. Another concern is performance. You have more control over performance, obviously, within the on-premise world because you decide what hardware you have, you decide, you know, what the back-end infrastructure for that hardware is. You control sort of all the variables, whereas when you move into the cloud, you are to some degree at the mercy of the cloud vendor. Security is always a big concern for folks, right? Once you take your data and you hand it over to someone else, and this ties right into the control point right below it, you're no longer solely responsible for the security around your data. That's not to say that cloud offerings aren't secure, but it certainly is a bit of a, you know, you're removing the blanket, if you will, from folks, and it can be a concern to pass that off. And to add on to the control point, you also get into the concept of if I give my data or move my data into the cloud and I decide 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, 3 years down the road, I don't wish to be part of that cloud provider anymore. How do I get my data back? How do I ensure that it no longer resides in some system somewhere that I don't see? So all of these are concerns and the reasons why you may wish to stay on premise. And you know, another thing that'll kind of throw in here that's not on the slide is there's just that historical feeling that a lot of folks have. This is the way we've done it yesterday. This is the way we would like to do it moving forward. And it aligns to how you build data centers, how you deploy applications within your company. So let's talk a little bit about 11.124, which was the last on-premise release prior to 11.2. That most folks out there in the EPM world, or I'll say a lot of folks, are still running on. So some considerations with 11.124, the fact that this software released back in 2015. So it is getting a little bit what I will call long in the tooth. We're on 5 years, just about to hit 6 years old code. And as anybody knows in the software world, right, 6 years is pretty old. And if you're sitting on 11.123, you can check another 2 years onto that because that version released in 2013. And so with that comes not just the age of the software itself. You know, you may be sitting there in a sort of EPM bubble where you're saying, well, 11.124 does everything I want it to do. It performs properly, my data's there, it works every close, it works every planning or budgeting cycle, and I'm not interested in upgrading. But the thing that happens, right, is the world moves around, if you will, out from underneath us. And so there's a host of third-party products that sort of come with that mantle of 11.124, 11.123. And just some of those are things like You're tied to older browsers, IE11 being the key one, which is end of life for Microsoft. Windows 2008 or about to hit end of life. Windows 2008 Server R2, right? Now we're talking about a server operating system for some folks that is 12, 13 years old. Windows 2012, Microsoft SQL servers of 2008, 2012. So you can see these versions, Java 1.6, 1.7. They all come with sort of an overhead, if you will, of end of life hanging over them, if you will. And for IT data centers and folks that support these systems, there's real concerns, both from a support perspective, but more importantly from a security perspective, that the older these systems get, the less able data centers are to tolerate them co-hosted with newer applications, both for security concerns and for just pure cost of supporting end-of-life systems. So that's one item. And then continuing along that thread, the 11.124 stack itself has a number of components in it that are pretty long in the tooth as well. So you've got WebLogic 10, OHS 11.117, and as I mentioned on the last slide, Java 1.6 that's baked into the product. None of these components support TLS 1.2, which is, as we speak, the latest in SSL support for security transmission and communication. TLS 1.3 is out, but even the latest versions don't support that. Now we can upgrade some of these components, right? We can patch WebLogic, we can upgrade OHS and Java in a supported fashion in 11.124, but it's time consuming. There's limited knowledge support of folks who are versed in doing that and comfortable doing that. And you're going to find yourself on a pretty short list of other customers who have gone down that path. So support themselves as an organization within Oracle is obviously transitioning, if you will, their focus and their thoughts and everything to 11.2 into the cloud. And the end of life for 11.124 was December 31st of 2021. Because of the pandemic that we're obviously all living in, and because of COVID, this date has been moved out 1 year. So now we're actually looking at an end of life of December 31st, 2022. But bear in mind that even though Oracle has kindly shifted out their dates, that does not remotely mean that any of these third-party components have shifted out their end-of-life dates. So before you think, oh, I just got a free year, I don't have to upgrade yet, you might want to double check and make sure that your data centers are comfortable supporting your SQL Server version, your Windows Server version, or whatever that is, because those are generally, as I've mentioned, the key drivers in any kind of forced move, if you will, from within an IT organization. Okay, so with all that said about yesterday, let's talk a little bit about 11.2. So when we talk about the latest version of 11.2, the latest version is 11.2.3. That code set actually dropped this last Thursday. And so as you can probably imagine, this presentation is a little bit more 11.2.2 focused. I will tell you right out of the gate, I have not had the chance or the pleasure to install 11.2.3 yet, though I do have multiple 11.2.1 and 2.2 installations and integrations under my belt. So I will talk about some 11.2.3 things, but just realize that I'm speaking from a place of research less than a place of actual execution. So some new third-party architectures that we support with the 11.2 code stack, right? We get Windows 2016 and 2019 support. We get Microsoft SQL 2016 support. We get JDK 1.8 support baked into the product, as well as WebLogic 12 support. There's a host of Oracle server versions for the database that also get further support. You can go to Oracle 19c, for example, and you can find all of those in the READMEs associated with the products in the support matrix. So in addition to that, one of the big changes is the browser change. So moving forward, the focus will be on Microsoft Edge, Google Chrome, and Firefox. IE11 is still supported, but it will be dropping in the next version. And then certainly last but not least, right, we've got extended on-premise support for these new versions through 2031 at least. That was also originally, I believe, 2030, and we've tacked on a year to that, and that will get revisited as time goes on, depending on how Oracle feels about potentially extending that with other development items they have in the pipeline. So one other thing to keep in mind here, right, is if you're moving to this version, you're looking at a new platform or environment, right? You're not going to do an upgrade in place on 11.124 to get up to 11.2.2, so, or 2.1 or 2.3. So just bear in mind that ultimately you're going to be looking at new hardware, and you're going to probably want to be looking at new hardware anyway, because chances are you're 3, 4, 5 years out of date on that side. Actually, before I move forward, oops, let me go back 2 slides. Before I move forward, there was a couple questions out there, and I'll go ahead and address these now about the end of life is December 2021. Some people are saying that my dates are wrong. That may be the case. I heard on a call earlier this week that got extended 1 year as well. I will fact check that and double back. If folks want confirmation, my email will be here at the end, and I will make sure we get that from the horse's mouth, if you will, from Oracle, to make sure that has been extended. If it is still 2021, then mea culpa, my apologies if I did get that wrong, but I'm happy to clarify it moving forward. All right, so let's talk about versions, right? 11.2 is a rapidly moving target, right? It wasn't that long ago, just in December of last year, that 11.2.1 released. We've already had 11.2.2, and now 11.2.3 is here. So this is a rapidly changing version world. I would say it's even a little more rapid than normal. So with that said, the new 11.2.3 release does introduce something that a lot of folks have been waiting for, and that is Linux support. Now, before you run out the door and go download this and get excited about Linux support, one caveat there is that the product suite right now supports Linux for the planning Essbase stack, if you will, but not for the HFM component. So HFM is not available on Linux yet. That should be released in 2021, but we don't have a firm date on when in 2021 that will be. I just know that it is a priority for the HFM development team, and they are working on getting that out there. With 11.2.3, and as I mentioned, the furthest I've gotten is really the README, and I would heartily recommend that folks go out and check that README and read the known issues section before diving right into 11.2.3. It's got enough, I'll call it issues, that it did give me pause. I'm looking forward to my first lab installation here in the next week or so, but there are a number of items called out in there, some of them around TLS support in particular, and TLS support to the back end. So in this case, Essbase server as well as SQL Server. So just keep an eye on that. And then moving forward in the future, we are looking to see a release of Essbase as a sort of standalone product. It's moved outside of the EPM stack from an Oracle development perspective and is now part of the database stack. And while Essbase 19c is available today as a cloud offering, it is not available as an on-premise offering, and we should see that either 19c or 20c or whatever they end up calling it, right, in 2021. All right, let's talk a little bit about downloads. So when you go out and you're ready to install this stack, I'm just going to put it out there. eDelivery is still eDelivery. I love the software. eDelivery is not my favorite site to navigate, and I don't necessarily find the way they break the packages down to be 100% intuitive. If you're like me and you just kind of swing in there and start grabbing stuff, you'll find that you've downloaded some things like 3 times. So when you download the full stack or the full suite, you're basically going to get or see 21 separate packages. And if you grab them all, then you're going to end up with 3 instances of SOA and 3 instances of OID and 3 ODIs, which compromises actually 2 different ODI versions, DRM and Weblogic. What you really need are 9 EPM install packages. So if you get the planning stack or you get the HFM stack, that's all you really need. It tends to have everything. So just kind of watch your downloads, or you'll be waiting around all day as you download, 30 gigs of software. Those 9 install packages are comprised of the Oracle HTTP server, or OHS, the EPM portions of it, for the server side components, which comes in 6 parts, a separate client installer, and then a separate documentation installer. And when you go through installing, you're going to want to check the prerequisites just like you always have. And there's actually, I will give Oracle kudos here. The documentation, if you read it and follow it, is pretty solid. It's going to tell you you got to disable UAC and sync your clocks. You got to validate your admin access and your host settings. And it'll walk you through everything you need to do to make sure your servers are ready prior to even bothering with the installation itself. It's also going to guide you about creating the shared file systems you will need if you're going to be in a deployment that is multi-server, right? So, I mean, in the lab setting, right, imagining everything running on 1 or 2 servers is a fairly realistic thing to go out and build, and I've done plenty of those. But in the real world, right, for clients, it's very rare that we're going to go out and build an enterprise infrastructure that is comprised of like 1 server that's running the database and OHS and the various WebLogic planning components, HFM components, etc. So with that, and especially in an environment that has high availability, we do need to create shared file systems for things like LCM and FDME, and the guide will walk you through that. You're going to unzip it just the same as previously, and if you're used to like installing 11.124, you'll know that you're going to get a whole bunch of prompts about, do you want to overwrite this file because it's already there? Don't worry about that stuff. Just unzip it all to the same directory, overwrite whatever it asked to overwrite, and you'll be good to go. So one thing that's a little bit different from 11.2.4, or 11.1.2.4, I should say, is that FDME includes ODI 12c Studio as part of the installation. So you don't have to go and install that separately like you used to have to if you wanted to have the full power of the ODI client to look into FDME and understand what's going on behind the covers. Planning, when you're doing the installation, to this day, still checks Essbase server. I find that to be really annoying, so I'm calling it out here because generally speaking, my planning server and my Essbase server are 2 completely different boxes. And the fact that if you're just kind of in a hurry and you check that planning box, you're going to get a full-blown installation of Essbase sitting underneath your planning server, and you really don't want that. So that's important. And virus scan is still a problem. This will bog down performance generally, but it will also bog down performance and cause issues with the installation. I did an installation with virus scan that was full blown and things started firing off left and right is not working. And disabling that and starting over from scratch did resolve that for me. So it's kind of your prereqs, right? You could really move that virus scan up to the prereq list and make sure that that stuff's at least disabled till you're done. And then ideally, anytime you're dealing with virus scan in an EPM system, you're going to set up some exception rules that will ignore the Oracle folder directory. And if you do that, you should be pretty good to go. All right, let's talk about the RCU. I picked this icon or this picture for a reason, because this is kind of how the RCU feels the first couple times through it. Once you've used it and you kind of get the feel for what it's doing, it's not as bad, but the initial exposure to this can be pretty painful. So first up, again, follow the directions from the documentation. They are accurate. You have to create a prefix for each server. So if I have 3 servers, I'm going to have 3 prefixes: demo 1, demo 2, demo 3. And when you run the RCU, you're going to tell the RCU to build the tables and users based upon the server you are on. So in other words, if I have 3 servers, I'm going to run the RCU 3 times, and I'm going to pass it 3 unique prefixes. If you mess this up, my experience has been just drop everything in the RCU tables or database or schema that you created and start over. It's not worth the hassle of troubleshooting this and trying to sort of repair it from the back end. I say this as somebody who's tried it a few times and come to the conclusion that less is more. It's much easier to just start over and rerun it on a couple boxes than it is to pull your hair out trying to understand why it's not working the way you'd hoped. Do not use special characters in the passwords. So there is some characters that are listed out in the documentation is not allowed. My general experience has been just try to get rid of them altogether. Make your password, long if you need to, but try to keep the ampersands and the parentheses and spaces and weird stuff out of the password. Use unique passwords between the system and RCU users. You will get prompted to use the same password for all the RC users, which is fine. But I do make sure that the sys user itself has a different password, and that's just a general best practice. And I can't reiterate this again. If this blows up on you for whatever reason, just drop it and start over. Actually, this is the same advice I think that was given on the presentation as well by some of the folks from the Oracle SEAL team. They were kind of in the same boat that if the RCU goes sideways on you, it's just easier to start from scratch. All right, let's talk a little bit about the EPM configuration portion of this. So after I've done all my RCU stuff and I've built out all of my tables that I need to really get to the EPM nitty gritty, I'm going to find out that I have to update this RCU schema.properties file. And if you look here, right, in the screenshots that I've provided, you will see that I've got 2 different servers. One on the right has a schema prefix on line 3 of dev, and the one on the left on line 3 has a schema prefix of dev2. Now, in this case, everything else is entirely the same, but what you're going to do is you're going to put your passwords into this file in plain text, and you're going to put your JDBC connector information into here and your prefix information in here, and then you're going to run the configuration utility, and it's kindly going to come out here and encode this for you. So after that first pass, these passwords will no longer be exposed. You'll see what you have here in my screenshots, which is a hashed string for the password. And again, in a distributed environment, you're going to have multiple prefixes. So don't try to use the same prefix across servers. It's just going to break stuff. The other thing I'll add in here is that when you run the RCU, it's going to go out and create SQL server or SQL users or tables, and a little bit of both actually, based upon these values. So you will find, for example, in a Microsoft SQL Server, a whole lot of dev underscore accounts. I want to say when I did the math, it was like 7 accounts per RCU execution or per server. So like in an 8 server environment, you're looking at 50 new SQL users that are going to get created as part of this. I'm not the designer, I'm just the messenger. So if you're shaking your head about that, that would be good feedback to give back to Oracle that this is a little bit crazy. So what do we do? After we've got our RCU set up and we launch our configuration utility, you're going to configure your admin server first. And by admin server, what I mean there is your Weblogic administration node. So you're going to run the configuration there. And once that's done, you're going to run the RCU on your other boxes, and you're going to need to go through the configuration for all the products. Once that's done and everything's successful, you will configure OHS as a last step. So don't configure OHS right away on your first box because you're just going to have to run it again. So you're better off just holding out until the end of your configuration. A couple other items of note. I have seen this happen both ways. So I have run my builds and seen that I need to copy the conf folder from underneath Weblogic to each of my downstream servers to get the services to deploy properly from the configuration utility. I've also seen this not be a requirement at all. And for the life of me, I honestly cannot tell you why sometimes I need to do this and sometimes I don't. I personally find this to be pretty kludgy. It implies that I cannot talk to the WebLogic administration server, but I can map drives between them. I can telnet to port 7001. All that stuff seems to work. And yet every now and then I find that I have to go under domains, EPM system, copy the conf from the admin server, rename the conf on my downstream server, and then replace this. And if all your deployments still fail after all this, you may be in a position where you want to drop the RCU and try to start this over from scratch. I know how bad that sounds, but it's happened to me. It doesn't seem to happen to me as much now because I've learned the lessons that I'm sharing with you, but it is a possibility. All right, next one. OHS has no service. So there is a, this is only partially true. There is now in 11.2.2 a node manager service that gets started as part or gets deployed as part of the configuration when you configure OHS. However, when you start and stop that service, it does not start and stop OHS. So if you're at all like me and probably a lot of other people who skipped over that part of the documentation, you get everything up, you go to log in and you hit your URL and you get a blank page. And you're sitting there staring at it going, why is that the case? And you change your URL so that you're only looking at the OHS port on 19,000 and you still get nothing. Well, if you go to the documentation, there's a nice little line that tells you to execute this command, which essentially is starting OHS underneath the covers of Node Manager. So Node Manager is the parent process that isn't doing much other than passing this command through, but only if you tell it to. That's a bit of a hassle. And so essentially the way around this is to write a script, command line script, batch script, that you can either call as part of your other scripts or can run manually to start OHS. Now, there's one more wrinkle here, and that wrinkle is this will prompt you for the WebLogic admin server password, because that's what it's connecting to start it. And if you don't want to type that in interactively every single time you restart OHS, you're going to use this value store user config after the OHS component command here in the bullet above. Once you've done that, you'll find that it's going to prompt you that first time, and then it's going to leave you alone, assuming you don't go and change the WebLogic admin user's password. So it's kind of a one-shot thing, and then you're on your way. Another little wrinkle about our good friend OHS is that there are multiple folder structures under the FMW config folder. 4 different copies from what I could tell. And when I first got in there and I was trying to do some customization for OHS and go tune things, it was a bit of a mystery as to which one it is I'm supposed to be using. For the record, it's the one under /instances. So it sources from, I should say, sources from OHS component, but it does use some of the files in /instances. It's a better way to say that. So when you execute this OHS component piece here, this is the folder under the OHS file structure that you'll be referencing. But when I had to change some of the look and feel items, I had to also make changes in the instances folder. So just be aware that the structure is definitely different than it was in 11.1.2.4, and that can be a little disconcerting for folks. All right, Weblogic Performance. So my initial reaction to the 11.2 software is that WebLogic 12c seems to have some performance issues. The first thing or just some issues in general, the first thing I'll point out is it used to be you had a nice little start-stop icon for WebLogic admin server. Those shortcuts are gone. So now you launch it from the startweblogic.cmd, which is located under the EPM system bin folder. So you can make a shortcut to that just like you can for the OHS. You can copy the batch script or call a different batch script to call it, whatever makes you happy. But at the end of the day, you're not going to get an icon that does it for you. My best experiences have happened from always starting the WebLogic server prior to my first start of the applications. So especially after the initial install and config, you want to have WebLogic server up. Now, anybody out there who's been doing this for a while will tell you that shouldn't be a requirement, but yeah, it is. I would do it. And I would even go so far as to make it a service and then just have it start up as part of the rest of the EPM stack to make your life easier. The products downstream in this version seem to be a lot happier when they can phone home. The other thing I've noticed is the WebLogic 12c kind of wants to randomize which address it's binding to, and this is especially true when IPv6 is available. So I've been doing a couple things here. You can look at the documentation, the support matrix, and they will tell you 100% that IPv6 is certified. And I've had nothing but headaches with it. So as a general rule of thumb, I have been disabling IPv6 on all of my 11.2 builds. And I've gone a step further, and I bind the IPv4 listen address in the WebLogic admin console for all the products, right? And that basically has allowed the products, in my experience, to start up a little bit faster. So it just helps improve performance for when those applications start up, because they're not, if you will, surfing around for which address WebLogic thinks they're going to bind to. They can only go to one place. And then last but certainly not least, I generally place the /console information in the mod WLOHS file for the Oracle HTTP server config. By doing this, then I can get to console from behind 19,000 like I do all the other products. So that's just kind of handy, and it works pretty well. I will say that if you're using SSL offloading from a load balancer, don't try to put the admin console behind it. I spent the better part of a couple days trying to get that to work, and it does not play nice. You'll get there, you'll get logged in, and then things inside of the WebLogic console do not play well. So you'll get a lot of errors. If anybody wants to take that challenge on and solve it and get back to me, I'm all ears. But after a couple days of fighting it, I decided that it really wasn't buying me much. So WebLogic admin console does not seem to play nice with offloaded SSL. Real quick, let's talk about some migration considerations. So when you're migrating from a previous version into 11.2, the first thing to keep in mind is the official word from Oracle is you have to go from 11.1 to 4. Now, there are pieces that you can lift and shift straight from 11.1 to 3, and there are plenty of examples of those. But I'm going to stick for this presentation to kind of towing the line here. You should upgrade to 11.1 to 4 and then migrate your objects out as recommended by Oracle. You can do that by just having a single 11.1 to 4 server that you stand up as a temporary spot and shift everything over to that and then shift it again to your new environment. But that would be my recommendation. A couple things you got to keep in mind when you're doing this. Once you've done it, you're going to LCM out of .4, you're going to LCM into .2. You have to have the same DSN names for planning. This is actually true in kind of any version of LCM with planning. If the DSNs don't match, the app's just going to fail out and not work for you. So you want to pre-build those in your new environment and then bring your planning objects in. So financial reports, when you import those, they'll come in via LCM. They'll also come in if you do the file import export feature from within Workspace to bring in your financial reports. But in either case, when you go to migrate security for reporting, right, it's entirely different now. There is an object in shared services called the document repository now that manages the security that used to be managed by reporting and analysis. And because the reporting and analysis, interactive reporting, and production reporting layers or components are gone, the whole security model has basically changed. So you will need to rebuild your security you can do that and still load it in via LCM if you understand how to sort of hack LCM in the back end. Or you can just go and manually rebuild it. Either way, there is documentation that includes a role map of, I used to have this role in 11.1.2x, and I want this role in 11.2, and how do I align those? So that documentation is out there. Another item I've noticed in the migration is that planning dimensional security has migration issues. So when you migrate a planning application, I highly recommend that you use the export and import security command features. So you're going to use those in your legacy environment, 11.1.2x. You're going to export that security. You're going to import that security into 11.2. And then you'll see your dimensional security show up. Now, once it's in 11.2, you can use LCM to move it between your 11.2 environments just fine. But there's something that's happening or not happening in the initial migration process from the legacy version into the new version. So just be aware of that. A couple other things that are important. EPMA is gone. So if you are a historical EPMA client, you're either going to move to Classic and manage things, within the individual applications for metadata, or you're going to move to DRM. And there is a limited use license case for historical EPMA clients that need to leverage DRM to replace that functionality. The licensing verbiage is out there on Oracle. I highly recommend you go read it if you find yourself in that scenario. But that's where things lie. And then last but not least, the ODI 12c Lkms are gone. So if you're a big ODI user and you're using it to integrate the products, you're going to want to think that through, because you have to come up with a replacement or code your own. So with that, we are now to our last poll question. When do I move?
Okay, let's see if we can get this launched. Relaunch polling. Want to relaunch it? All right, everybody, Answer the question. When do I move?
Yep, I'll schedule my upgrade plan shortly after this call. I'm going to hold off until 2021. I need Linux first. Well, that's out now, just not for HFM, so that may hold you back, or I'm headed to the cloud.
All right, a few more seconds left. All right, we're at 30 seconds. End polling, share results. Jeff, can you see the results on the screen?
I don't actually see the results. Whoops.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll share them with you. All right. So 77% said I'll delay my upgrade until 2021. 13% said I'm headed to the cloud. And then there was a tie for third place. 5% said I'll schedule my upgrade plan shortly after this call. And 5% said I need the Linux version first.
Okay. Well, there it is. So a lot of folks are still going to kind of sit on the fence and hold off until 2021, which I completely understand, because new code makes a lot of folks nervous. Appreciate the feedback on that one. And let's go ahead and have a reminder real quick on the webinar giveaway. So if you are interested in the gift card, go ahead and follow these directions. And then I'm going to switch to the last slide and use the last 2 minutes I have to try to answer some questions that came up. Okay, so one of the questions, prior to 11.2, there's a rapid compact deployment option. It's great for quick single server deployments. The option's not available in 11.2x. Any recommendations? Yeah, you're basically going to have to just build out the products. I know it's a hassle. Compact deployment had its challenges. I feel even in the old version, it was kind of handy, but at the same time, it could take forever to fire up 4 or 5 products underneath one giant JVM. So I was never personally terribly thrilled with it, but I haven't heard any plans for them to replace that either. Somebody asks, did I catch correctly that EPM 11.2.2 supports Oracle Database 19c? So 11.2.2 does support 19c, as does 11.2.3. So if you go out and search EPM certification matrix, you'll be able to look in there and see the supported versions, but that one's definitely listed. Next question. Of Edge, Chrome, and Firefox, have you found one of them that works best? Yeah, my best experience has actually been with Edge, which I'm sort of surprised to say. If you get rid of all the prompts that Edge likes to use around things such as pop-ups and all kinds of, wants to prompt you for passwords a lot. If you turn all that stuff off, and if you make sure that you're clearing your cache all the time, Edge works pretty well in my experience. Okay, what is the difference between the WebLogic admin server and the OHS node manager? So the WebLogic admin server is basically the component that is the parent for deploying all of the downstream JVM Java products. So it's always been there in the back end of the suite, but it's really never been something that I would say non-IT folks see too much of. So that's back there, and the node manager is really just a new component that allows the management and launch of the Oracle HTTP server that is the front door that users are used to seeing when they hit that port 19,000. You can deploy WebLogic admin server as a service. You got to code that script and go out and write it yourself and deploy it, but you can certainly do it. Okay, what do you recommend for Hfar reports via LCM versus creating folders in Workspace? Hfar reports imported via LCM are not working. I don't have a short answer for that. I'd have to kind of understand why they're not working. Feel free to email me about that. But my experience has been either method should work, but keep in mind that you may have to modify data sources and things because they're going to bring in the source data sources. I am over, Robin. Do I have a little bandwidth to keep answering these questions?
Yes, of course.
Okay, awesome. Regarding OHS, did you ever come across the issue that in the HTTP conf file, the server name is messed up after the config? Instead of the name, it adds something like server 777 leading to OHS starting up on that port instead of 19,000. No, that one's new to me. I won't go so far as to say I'm surprised about it, but yeah, I would keep an eye on that. My initial thought would be that for some reason, when the configuration utility was run, it felt like the server could not bind to that port. So you might double check to make sure, again, with those prerequisites, anything that might block a port call, especially a firewall local to the box, would be turned off. Have you done any performance benchmark testing, EPM 11.2.2 versus 11.1.2.4? So under the covers, 11.2.2 and 11.1.2.4 are pretty similar, right? There's not a lot of code changes that should really be impacting things around performance. In fact, Essbase underneath the covers is 11.1.2.4, and if you have any issues with Essbase in the 11.2.2 code line, they're going to direct you to install Essbase 11.1.2.4 patches. I've already been through that for a couple clients, so just keep that in mind. So performance, you really should be like to like. The biggest thing to keep in mind is any performance impacts to moving to new software, databases, operating systems, all that good stuff. So the next question, 11.2.4 to 11.2 is not an in-place upgrade. No, it is not an in-place upgrade. You have to have a clean installation, and then you're going to move your artifacts. And then somebody asked, can you import, export ODI Lkms from old to new version? Well, you can import and export them, but keep in mind that even with planning, you can get these to work. I've done it. With HFM, the last version of working Lkm we had was based around the old code. So what I mean by the old code is the DCOM model. So those Lkms don't work in 11.1.2.4 and they don't work in 11.2.2 either. So that will require you to do some work. Now there is an Oracle document article you can go Google out there that Oracle engineers wrote about how you could build your own Lkm to get that to work. And you're welcome to give it a shot. Okay, Classic versus DRM, which do I prefer and why? So Classic, I guess I would have to say, as an infrastructure guy, I prefer Classic because it's pretty easy. DRM is probably the better answer from an application perspective if you have metadata that's got to be synced across multiple sources, or you're already using something like DRM as your single source of truth for non-EPM application metadata. So the short answer is it really depends, but my life is usually easier when folks just do Classic. Next question. When moving to AWS, which shared storage option is recommended when we set up active passive for Essbase? So with Essbase clustering, and really with Essbase in general, right, you're going to want to go to the fastest storage option you can get from any cloud provider, and you're generally going to want to go to file level storage for that as opposed to like an object level storage. And I'm pretty sure the documentation bears that out as well if you look in the prerequisites of what's required for a share there. All right, using LCM 11.124, we get the path too long error after copying to files to Windows other server. Any suggestions? We can't change the law. Okay, I'm going to guess that LCM question about the path being too long is related to financial reporting. Because it's the only product historically that has multiple folder structure levels that get to be a problem. So the way you can do that, if you want to truly use LCM, because you have report level security, then I would highly recommend that you flat out your reporting structure for the exports and the imports, and then rebuild it inside the new version. Okay. And how would the upgrade from Essbase 11.124 to either Essbase 19 or 20C? Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know because I don't have an on-premise version of Essbase 19 or 20 yet. So obviously once that releases, that's probably going to be one of the first things we'll do a webinar or a blog or something on. I'm excited to see 19C or 20C or whatever they end up calling it on premise. But until that day comes, I honestly have to sort of just shrug and say I don't know what it's going to look like until they hand me a product that I can work around. And then there's one last question. I think there was a reference to a future presentation, EPMA to DRM migration. When is that? That's a great question. I tell you what, keep an eye on our blog, and when we have a date for that, that's where we will publish that, and then you're more than welcome to attend. But I don't have a date for when that's going to happen right now. And I think
with that, we have all of our questions answered. Thank you so much. It was such an informative presentation. I have one final closing remark from somebody in the audience saying, I'm so appreciative of this presentation, appreciate the real talk, and Jeff pointing out life experiences to save me time and frustration later. Thank you. And I think that sums it up. So thank you so much, Jeff. It was really, really, really interesting information. I want to encourage everyone to attend the Ask the Experts panel at the top of the hour.